what you hide is what you fear, and what you hide from is what you fear. And it's internal, external. There were internal things that I feared and external things that I feared. Internally, I feared that I wasn't good enough. And I'm still in healing. I'm still in recovery, believe me. But it took me a long time to open up my heart and look inside and say, I am okay the way I am. I'm good the way I am, and I can love myself.
Welcome to Pebbles of Light, where we highlight the everyday people who bring hope, comfort, and light to others. I'm your host, Maxson, sharing meaningful stories to help you find light in your journey. If the messages shared resonate with you, please follow, share, or support the podcast through Patreon to help keep the mic on and spread the light even farther. In the last episode, we talked with Jay Setchell about his mantra, "If it is to be, it is up to me." This phrase has been rolling through my mind a lot this past week as I've gone about daily activities and chores. From little things like those dishes that need to be put away to getting caught up on emails and overdue tasks. If it is to be, it is up to me. Jay's insights provide a masterclass in leadership, perseverance, and mindset. The pebble for that episode was to choose one area where you've been tempted to quit and take one small step forward this week instead. In today's episode, we hear the remarkable story of Calvin Bagley, who shares about personal resilience, from hiding from the school bus as a child to discovering purpose, healing, and transformation. My guest today, Calvin Bagley, knows what it means to build a life from nothing, self-taught, self-made, and spiritually restored. His journey shows how life's hardest pivots can shape our deepest purpose. Calvin, thanks so much for being here. Please take a moment to introduce yourself.
Thank you. I really appreciate you having me. My name is Calvin Bagley, and today I'm an entrepreneur in the healthcare space, particularly in financial services and insurance. And I was raised in a different kind of world, and we'll talk a lot about that, I'm sure, where I was homeschooled and denied an education until I'm in my 20s, essentially. And so, yeah, that's a little bit about me to get us started.
You wrote a book called Hiding from the School Bus. And when you look back at that idea of hiding, what did that mean to you as a child, and what did it cost you in your childhood?
Yeah, I think starting with hiding is the right place because everyone's hiding from something. And, if you're listening to this, you kind of ask yourself, what am I hiding? What am I hiding from the world? And what am I hiding from in the world? And for me, I started at a very young age with hiding from the school bus because my parents told me we were homeschooled and they said, don't let the school bus see you because if they do, they might take you to school and school is an evil place. We hid from the school bus whenever it came by we lived out in the country in this very rural area in Utah. In fact, actually, until I was about maybe 4, 5 years old. There was no school bus. We lived so far where I was born and brought home from the hospital. It was so far away from anything that there was no school bus. And that's actually when my parents started homeschooling. And so it started out of necessity, and then it turned into this kind of righteous, holier than thou sort of a familial institution where we were withheld education and literally hid out of fear that the school bus would see us. And so I started there, but as I got older, I hid because I realized that I had no education, that wasn't as smart, quote unquote, smart as the kids that I met at church and things. And I didn't know very, very basic things. And so, that's where my hiding started.
Yeah. And so what did that absence of formal education do for you? So when you were younger, there was kind of, you weren't necessarily aware of what you were missing. But as you got older, you started to recognize what you were missing. And was there an inherent just kind of desire to want to learn and understand things?
Yes, I was hiding, man, it's such a setback to not have education and to not be at least knowledgeable as to what your peers are saying. So I'd go to church. The place that I would interact with people was a church. So fortunately, my family went to church on Sunday. We would go to church on Sunday, even though my parents had more extremist religious views and were not really mainstream religious. They were my dad's. Many of his best friends were polygamous, actually, and he didn't practice polygamy, but he associated with this more extreme group of people. And so my parents had a lot of really extreme rules. And so I would go and interact with kids my age at church, but I realized that I didn't know the things they knew. Like they would read, and I couldn't read until I was almost 7 years old. Was when I learned to read. My sister taught me to read, and I couldn't do so many things. And so I began to how it affected me is that I began to feel like I wasn't intelligent. that I wasn't as good as other people, or that and I began to realize that I didn't have what they had, and I had to hide it. I had to pretend like I was, and then you overcompensate and you do things that make you really an outsider. And so I just became more and more and more of an outsider. Even with this small group of kids that I knew at church, I was the weirdo. I was very strange. I didn't go to church I didn't go to school. They didn't see me on the school bus. They knew that something was different and strange about me. And so I would overcompensate in every way I could, making the matter worse and worse and just making me feel like I was an outcast. And so I desired at that age, more than desiring education or understanding, I just desired to be normal. I just wanted to be like the other kids, or what I thought was normal. Little did I realize that probably all of those kids also just wanted to be quote unquote normal, right?
Yeah.
But for me, I knew I was very different, and that was very hard for me.
So, at what point did you start to question that story that shame was telling you and that idea of I may be different, things may be different, but I can still find my place in the world?
I got a lot of confidence learning to read. When I was about 7 years old, I asked my mom if I could read, and she said, "Well, I guess you're about old enough now." And she assigned my sister, which is what my mother often did, was assign one of my siblings to do her parental duties. In fact, when I was born, I came home from the hospital and like 3 days old, and my mother handed me to my 14-year-old sister, oldest sister, because there were 9 of us, and I was number 7. She handed me to my 14-year-old sister and said, according to my sister, the quote is, "This one is yours. This one's yours." And my sister raised me as her child. In fact, there was a lot of trauma happening in my household, spanning all kinds of different strange abuses. And so my poor sister raised me like I was her own. So when I was 7 years old, she had left the house, and when she left, I felt like I had lost my mother. I really went through this major abandonment, not understanding that until I was an adult, that I had been abandoned by what I believed to be my mother. And my 3rd sister, or my 4th sister actually, was a reader. She loved to read, and so anything she could get her hands on, she loved to read. And I should tell you that up until for my first 5 siblings, they did attend some school, but by the time I was born, there was no school. And so some of them received some education. And so they had some foundation. Well, my sister, Kate, who was the 4th of my older siblings, she's taught me to read. I had wanted to read because I wanted to be normal, right? And there was the alphabet across the top of our living room that my parents had left there because, we were quote unquote homeschooling. And I had tried to memorize the alphabet, but I wasn't sure which way it started. And so I inadvertently memorized it backwards. So I memorized the alphabet Z, Y, X, W, V, U, T, S, R, Q, P, O, N, M, L, K, J, I, H, G, F, E, D, C, B, A.
Wow.
And so my sister then helped me to learn to read. And that was a really a point of pride for me, because some of my older brother, I had 2 older brothers now, they kind of struggled to read. And so, we would go to church on Sunday and open up the scriptures, and I was so proud of myself that I could read through a verse now in class. And my brother, just older than me, couldn't do that and really struggled, and he was very embarrassed. And I look back and I feel bad a little bit that I would actually put on some showmanship and probably humiliate him, and I'm not proud of that. That for me, that was a point where I said, oh, I can start to learn things even though I didn't have access to any way to learn.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that as far as if you were limited in what you were allowed to read or what you had access to. Because I remember when my kids started to read, I got teary-eyed, and because I was like, the world is open to you now, whether it's, reading fiction books and your imagination and all these different things, or nonfiction, learning about whatever you may want to learn about. So what was that like for you, of just the knowledge that becomes available as you start to read?
Well, there were a lot of books in my house. A lot of my parents had a large collection. I'm not sure where they got it from, of books. Most of them didn't interest me. We did have an Encyclopedia Britannica. And so I would go in there and look at things and what have you. So there was something there, but we didn't have any school books. We started out when I was very young. My parents did provide us some school books, although they would never check and see if we did them or if we followed through with anything. We were just total self-study. And we would stay in the house during school hours most of the time while my dad would be out working in the garden, because we lived on a farm and we grew most of our own food. Imagine growing up like it's the 1905, but it's actually 1985. That's kind of how we were living. No TV in the house and things like that. And so Um, I didn't have a lot of books to read or to study. So I would learn things from encyclopedia and stuff like that, but I really didn't learn much. I learned enough to get by. And my real learning didn't come until I was in my late teens and went on a mission. And so I went through these all my teenage years. Actually, when I was about 16, really kind of declared independence from my parents. And enough of my older siblings had rebelled and had run away from home or had gotten girlfriends pregnant and all those types of things that my parents, the worst, what my parents considered to be the worst things that could happen. My older siblings were rebelling, leaving the faith, throwing everything out, running off with boyfriends and girlfriends and stuff like that. And so everything, there was just complete rebellion. And so by the time I was about 16, I basically said, I'm going to do it my way. And if you don't like it, I'll run away. And they knew that I could because everyone else had. And so I stayed home until I was 19. And when I was 19, got a call to go on a mission to go to Brazil. And so well, my point is that during that time, I could have chosen to go to school and I could have forced it on my parents because they were weakened enough by my older siblings. But at that point, I knew I couldn't. I didn't know basic things like I could maybe give you times tables, but I could not multiply and divide a fraction. I had no clue about, how anything related to advanced or not even advanced, like intermediate mathematics and other things. So or science or anything. I just had no foundation for anything. And so I realized I could not go to school or I would just make a total fool of myself. And so I just didn't. And when I was 19 years old, I received a mission call. My parents weren't sure if I would be able to go because, they thought that I was already messing up all over the place. But I was gonna do it for myself. I was doing it my way for myself. And I got my mission call to go to Brazil, and I was so excited. I remember I opened it up, I read Brazil. One of my friends was there that night, and Garth from the ward, from church. And I said to Garth, "I'm so excited that I'm going to Africa." And he was like, "I think Brazil's in South America." Yeah, so anyway, going to Brazil, taught me English. I had to learn Portuguese. So I went to the Missionary Training Center in Provo, Utah, and I studied and studied. In the way the way to learn Portuguese is you got to learn English first. You got to learn what a verb is and what a noun is and how to conjugate, verbs and how a sentence structure works and things like that. And so I learned English by learning Portuguese. And that was the first experience of my life where I was actually in a classroom learning something, and it was at the Missionary Training Center.
So, were you the first of your siblings to go on a mission then?
I was not. I have two my oldest sister, the one that I said was like my mother, she went on a mission. While she was on the mission, she decided that she did not want to be a part of the religion. And so she left the church on her mission. She was in South Africa and she came home. It was very interesting because they say there's a spiritual gift to someone is given to believe. I just felt that from the time I was very young, I felt the spirit of God at church from a very young age, and I could separate that from my parents' kooky ways of doing things and beliefs and things and the type of abuse and things that were happening at home. I was able to separate that out and it was always true to me. But she came home and was very, very different and never participated in the church or any organized religion again. And then I had one older brother that went on a mission and he did complete his mission. And he and I, to my knowledge, I think we're the only because I'm not as close with all my siblings all the time. I don't know what they're doing all the time, but I believe the two of us are the only ones that continue to attend church on a regular basis today.
So, for you, it seems like there was just kind of always this desire to believe, and you always had your own testimony. You weren't necessarily relying upon mom and dad because their testimony was somewhat distorted to what was right. And could you tell that? Could you tell, oh, what mom and dad are doing isn't necessarily aligned with my belief system? And how would you reconcile those two belief systems then?
It was a very gradual thing, with little things breaking along the way, and realizing that, I remember at one point when I was a very, maybe 14-year-old teenager, my first time ever going to the temple in Provo, Utah. Our bishop took us out there and I rode with him and spent time with him and I just admired him so much and thought he was an incredible person and looked up to him. Um, he did things that my parents would not approve of For example, on our drive when we were there, we had a hamburger. Well, that's my parents did not allow us to eat red meat, and he drank a soda, and we listened to current music on the radio and things like that, and just these things were things that my parents absolutely abhorred and would they would actually I would come home from church on Sunday, maybe a primary class when I was very young, and my parents would ask me what the primary teacher had taught us and then would correct things that they thought were incorrect. And so there was just these gradual things that broke along the way. And I write in my book about this experience I had as a missionary where I was with one of my mission companions and he gave this lesson. We were teaching someone about the gospel of Jesus Christ. And he gives this analogy about Star Wars and that the kids can relate to about good and evil and what have you and temptation and sin and whatever. I don't remember what the analogy was about, but I remember that it had Star Wars in it. And when we left, I said, "Hey, Elder, you shouldn't use Star Wars in your teaching. Star Wars it perverts the whole nature of God and blah 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 blah." And he's like, "What are you talking about? I love Star Wars." And I'm thinking to myself, "Wait a minute. My dad told me Star Wars is bad because there's you can't because the Force." It was my dad's belief was that the Force distorts things, and maybe to a certain extent you could argue his case, but it distorts things because there can't be two sides of one force. There's either good or evil, and this makes it look like there's one force and you can use it for good or evil. And so he was really anti-Star Wars, and of course we didn't watch any movies of the day, and so it was like I didn't understand Star Wars, and so my companion, he goes through this whole thing to kind of to challenge what I was saying and what my father had said. And it was one of those moments on my mission at 20 plus years old where I thought, wait a minute, I'm parroting the things that my parents said and believed. And I need to find my own beliefs. And it really was, even though this happened gradually over all of my, say, teenage years, that was one of the defining moments where I said, I really need to reevaluate. And when I say something like I believe it, I need to know that that's from me and not something I'm just parroting.
And then years later, you had the opportunity to serve as a bishop. And so how did your experience as a child and your relationship with those church leaders who had such a great effect on you, how did that play into your role and the ways that you served those in your ward?
Yeah, so fast forward through a lot of things, I became a bishop in my I guess it was my early 40s, and served in my ward here in Las Vegas where I live. Man, I tried really hard to be a good youth bishop and to spend my time and effort on the young men and young women and do things for them that just would have an impact on their life. For example, I was reading through the handbook one day and I realized that it says that there are such things as ward and stake youth conferences. And I went to my stake president. I said, "Hey, the handbook says you could have a ward youth conference." And he was like, "Oh, it sure does." And I said, "Yeah, I want to have a ward youth conference." And he was like, "Okay, you can do that." And so I had all these kids, and the ward that I was in had a mix of different socioeconomic circumstances, and so I had a bunch of kids that had heard about the pioneers and all this stuff and people coming to Utah, but had never been to Salt Lake City, and they lived in Las Vegas. And I was like, we are going to go to Temple Square. And we went to all the different sites. We went to the temple and we went to the Family History Center and we went to the This Is the Place monument and what have you. And these kids had the most incredible experience. And so, yeah, so to answer your question, I really poured myself into the youth of my ward because I realized that I could relate to how important that time in life is.
Yeah, and it was probably kind of cathartic, right? That idea of being able to give back the things that maybe you wish you would have had in more abundance within your home than what you did. So let's back up a little bit. We fast forwarded really fast there
Yeah,
to
sure.
Bishop. Let's fill in the blanks a little bit between going on mission, learning English, and then all of a sudden you come back to Las Vegas. And what did that look like as far as formal education for you?
When I was finishing up my mission, I had looked forward to my mission all throughout my life, especially my teenage years, and I didn't know what was going to happen after. That was my end goal to achieve that, and I'd done that. I'd learned another language. I became very proficient at Portuguese, and I felt like this is something I can do really well. In fact, that was the one confidence that I had coming back from a mission is if push comes to shove, I could find a job where I need to learn languages. I know I can do that. And So at the end of my mission, all of my mission companions and friends and everything on the mission who were from the United States, they were all talking about going to BYU. Back then it was Rick's College instead of BYU, Idaho and Idaho, or some other school. I had one companion that was going to Stanford, a really smart guy. And so they're all talking about these places they're going to go. I don't even have a high school equivalent. I haven't even graduated from high school. And so I decided after that 2 years in Brazil that I could do anything. I unfortunately had a little all of a sudden had this little bit of a Superman complex, like, "I can do this," you know? So I came back to my little town. My parents, at this point, were living in a small town outside of Vernal, Utah. It's a town of about 400 people. I came back to that town, and I decided that I was going to study and get my GED, my general equivalency for a high school diploma. And so I studied for a few months. I bought some study stuff at a store in Vernal, and I took the general education exam, and I got my GED. I was almost 22 years old when I got my GED. I was late 21, and I was very proud of that. When I was studying, my dad looked at that and he said, "What are you doing?" And I told him I was studying to get my GED, and he said, "What do you need that for? Do you need a piece of paper? Do you need them to tell you you're smart?" And so he did not approve of that. But, I did it anyway and got my GED, and then I said, I'm trying to figure out how to get into college, and at the time, the ACT was kind of the big college entrance exam that everyone took, and so I said, "I'm gonna take the ACT now because I passed the GED, and I was so proud of myself. I don't know what my score is. They don't give you a score. They just say pass or fail, you know? So I got this really big, thick ACT study guide, and I stayed up nights. I was working in the day. I was working at a pawn shop, which was a hilarious and fun place to work. It was a pawn shop owned by members of the like this guy who was a bishop, a member of the church. So it's like the most honest pawn shop you've ever heard of. And I had so many fun experiences there and had such a great time. So I'd work in the day, and then at night I would study. And I studied and studied and studied. I took the ACT exam. I went in to take the exam. It was given at the high school. So I went to the high school, and there's all these kids, 16, 17-year-old kids around me. And at this point I'm 21 plus. And I was so intimidated. I took the exam. Long story short, I scored so low. So then I tried to apply to schools. Of course, no one would take me. I got denied by every school, the USU Extension Service, Utah State University, the local one, USU. My brother was living in Las Vegas. I applied to UNLV. I got denied. I got to apply to College of Southern Nevada, which back then was just a 2-year college. I got denied. That was just no one would take me. And so my brother invited me to come live with him in Las Vegas. He said he was married at the time, and he's been married many times, but at the time he was married to a woman who was a registered nurse, so she was educated, and she offered to help me. And her name is Julie, and Julie was an angel for me. And so I came to Las Vegas, and Julie went with me to this store called Learning is Fun in Las Vegas, which was a store for, like teachers. And we bought all of these books for math because that was where I was really, really weak. And she would open the book and say, "Hey, do you know how to do this?" And I would say, "No." And she'd go down a grade. "Do you know how to do this?" "No." And we went all the way down to 3rd grade math. And we had 3rd through 12th grade math books, and I would work on them at home, and she would teach me stuff when she came home from her 12-hour shift at the hospital, and would help me through stuff, and got me to the point where I had some confidence. And she also encouraged me and explained to me how school works, and how college works and stuff. Got an appointment for me to meet with a counselor, an admissions counselor at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. And so I went in and sat with the woman. I explained to her my history. I told her about my lack of education. I told her about going to Brazil and learning to speak Portuguese, and how I got my GED, at 20 last year when I was 21, and all these things. And the woman was very kind and said, "You know what? We'll give you a chance. Here's what we'll do. I'll give you a chance," is what she said. "I'll give you 2 semesters as a non-admitted student auditing classes. So you'll audit the classes, but you'll get graded. And if you get passing grades for 2 semesters, we will admit you to the university." And so I started, with math 97 because I couldn't take 97. I had to take 97, then 98, then I could take 101. I took some
Yeah.
English classes. I took a Spanish class and some other things. And in my 2 first semesters, I had a perfect 4.0 and was admitted to UNLV. And that's how I eventually made my way into college.
What do you think was the trajectory your parents had in mind for you? And did they celebrate when you chose a different trajectory? Like you had mentioned that your dad was like, "Why do you need that?" What was he thinking your life would look like?
My dad was always had given people monikers. Like, my brother was supposed to be a mechanic. He was very mechanical. And my oldest brother, the one that also served a mission, my dad said he was going to be a laborer. And he had given us all titles of who we what we were supposed to be. And for me, I was supposed to be a salesman, which, I am a salesman. So he got that right, I guess.
You got it right.
I've talked. My brother-in-law, who was not as kind to me, always said that I was going to be a weatherman because all I do is talk and never say anything. So, yeah, I was supposed to talk and do sales and whatever, and so I guess I'm not that far off from what he said because I am social and things, but at the same time, when I went to school, he did not approve of that, and when I graduated from UNLV, there was a long, long road for me. I didn't I got through those first 2 semesters, and I didn't stay because I was not used to the structure of school. When I was 22 years old going to UNLV for the first time, it was the first time I had attended a lecture other than the Missionary Training Center. First time I'd ever attended a lecture. I had never taken a test before. We used Scantrons for testing. I had no idea what I was doing. Like, someone had to explain to me how to use a
Fill in
Scantron.
the yeah, fill in the bubble.
Fill in the bubbles. I'd never filled in the bubbles. I had never, they told me to bring these certain types of books and stuff. I mean, thank goodness for my sister-in-law. She helped me through so much, but the structure of school was really difficult for me. And so I got admitted to UNLV. I went to summer school and then I quit. And I ended up taking this deviation where I became a flight attendant and I moved to Chicago and I started flying all over the world, which was such an important part of me growing up and growing my own ideas of opinions of life and things like that. And so I ended up in Chicago for several years, and I was in Chicago when 9/11 happened. I was on the tarmac at O'Hare Airport when the planes went into the World Trade Center and we were all stopped there. And that's a whole story unto itself. And I write a lot about that whole experience in my book. But after that happened, I decided I need to return to school, and I came back to Las Vegas and went to UNLV and got serious about it. By the time I graduated with my degree in business administration, which that they say, what do you call someone who goes to school for 10 years? You call them doctor. Well, in my case, I went to school essentially for 10 years and got my degree in business administration. I was 33 years old when I graduated and married.
Yeah. Yeah, we had kind of a cool connection when we were talking earlier because you're September 11th. Everybody kind of knows where they were. I was in Chicago as well, and it was my first day of graduate school at Northwestern University. At the time, I was studying cancer biology. Coming from northern Minnesota, Chicago was a very different place, and was just kind of trying to find my way. Ended up reaching out to a friend who I'd gone to high school. Well, I knew it from Bible camp. We'd gone to different high schools, but we kind of kept in touch throughout the years. And he had moved to Salt Lake to work on the Olympics. And so I reached out to him and said, "Hey, I'm starting this grad school program here in Chicago and not necessarily sure if it's the right thing. What'd you decide to do with your math degree?" And he's like, "Oh, that's funny. I moved to Utah and I'm working on the Olympics. And while I've been here, I've been going to a different church and you should check it out." And that was kind of about it for me to want to learn more. And so I started learning more about the church and decided I was going to switch graduate school programs and do toxicology instead. And so I switched to University of Rochester in upstate New York. And so then I transferred up there. And then eventually I decided I didn't necessarily want a degree that would require me to get government grants all the time for my job. So I ended up quitting that PhD program as well. And so similarly, it took me a while. So after I'd quit that PhD program, I felt I should serve a mission. So I served a mission when I was 25. And then eventually decided I would finally get a doctorate degree. And so I went to pharmacy school. But it took me a long time as well, a little bit over 10 years. But I did eventually get the doctor title.
But you are doctorate, so that's good.
Yeah.
It's a cool
got there.
connection that we were both in Chicago at that time, and it was, as we were talking about, it was such a surreal experience, and just to be there in a place, a large city, which also carried with it some fear that there could be an attack there as well. A beautiful, America's second city. I always say that I only think there are three real cities in the U.S. There's New York, Chicago, and San Francisco. Those are like the only three places where you could feel like you live in an urban environment, a true urban city.
Yeah. And I still love Chicago. It's one of my favorite places. And I think part of it is because it was so formative in my decision making and the trajectory of my life, really. Because choosing to just follow through on that friend who's like, you should check this out, has definitely changed everything for me.
Wow. I love Chicago too, and for me, it's the same reason. It was a place where I was formed, and you know, even though I had served a mission and done all these things, I think Chicago is where I really began to decide if I was going to live the gospel for for myself, because the mission's over. I've accomplished the thing that I had always set out to do, and now you settle in and you say, wait a minute, am I really going to do this for the rest of my life? Do I really believe it to that extent? And I had all these friends. My flight attendant friends were so amazing. I have wonderful, wonderful friends that I still have to this day. I read about Tammy and Hector and some of the fun things that we did and the life that we were having. It was an incredible, and I would equate that to most people's college experience when they go off to college and make friends and make these lifelong connections and things. That was Chicago for me as a flight attendant. But at the same time, my friends, they didn't have my faith, and so I was put in many situations where I had to decide, am I going to continue with my faith? And I had some challenges during that time of my life too, and trying to balance out, hey, am I really going to live this? And it was so important. And so Chicago to me is all of those things growing up. It's like you said, my formation years of my early 20s.
Yeah. And then you finish your degree, and then now you're an entrepreneur. How did that come to be, that transition there?
My wife and I were married when I was 31. And at that point, I had been working for Bank of America, and I was a branch manager for Bank of America. And so many people going to school in business management, I was doing business administration, they're hoping to someday have the job that I already had. And I had worked my way up as a teller. I started as a teller because I heard they had tuition reimbursement. So when I came back to UNLV, I was like, oh, I need that tuition reimbursement. But I kept getting promoted and promoted. So by the time I graduated, I was a branch manager. And I almost wanted to give up because school had been so difficult so long, and I was taking night classes now. And my wife, who was finishing her graduate degree and getting ready to do her PhD, was like, "Oh, no, no, no." She was teaching at UNLV. It's funny because sometimes the tellers who worked for me, they would work for me in the day and they would go and take her class at night because she taught business communications at UNLV. And so my wife's a professor, and I haven't graduated yet. So I was like, okay, the pressure's on. So I did finish that degree, and I'm very, very proud to have done that. But I kept moving up at Bank of America and became a regional manager for them, and then eventually wanted to start out on my own, and took the opportunity that came to me to move into more financial services and insurance. And because inside of me, I have never, we're getting to the point where I can sort of connect the dots and say, hey, why am I who I am today? And so many people wish they could go back and change the past and regret things and what have you. And if I just focused on the individual things that happened in my life, there's so much that I could either regret or be angry about or want to change. But if I did, I wouldn't be here today. And so I have, reaching this point in my life where I'm saying, I embrace everything that brought me here, all the good, the bad, the abuse, the neglect, the lack of education, gave me the drive to be different, and I am different. And one of the things that makes me different than everyone else, and everyone has something that makes them different. One of the things that makes me different is that I want to do it on my way, and I just have this really strong entrepreneurial drive. And so I moved out onto my own and started my first company. It was called Sun City Financial, and the reason it was Sun City, the idea was that it's for seniors, to serve the needs of people who are going into retirement. And then multiple startups have evolved since then. My most known company is Nuvo Health, and Nuvo Health is primarily in insurance for seniors. And we have multiple companies that are under that umbrella, the Medicare Store, which has physical locations where people can come and get help with their Medicare throughout the Southwest, Texas, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico. And then we have Plan Fit, myplanfit.com. And with Plan Fit, we service seniors all over the country. and help them to make decisions about their health care. And it's not just like getting health insurance when you're a senior, making sure that it works. And so we have a 30-person service team that just helps people to when they have problems like balance billing or erroneous billing or authorization issues with their HMO or whatever it is, we help them through those things. And we now have helped 75,000 people to with their Medicare or health insurance across the United States. And so it just sort of started with one thing, and then it turned into more things and more things, and grew and grew. But for me, my success in business goes back to this scrappy grit that I wouldn't have if didn't have to do it the hard way that I did.
Yeah. And I love that your company works so hard to provide service to support people who may not have the needs that they have. I mean, obviously there's a financial component as well, but I feel like there's also that service side of trying to reach out to those who may not have the capability of being able to handle the things that's are being thrown at them with their insurance and billing and all of the things.
Absolutely. And with Medicare, we help everyone all the way from, the most wealthy who can pay for everything down to the people with Medicare and Medicaid who have welfare and can't afford anything. All of those, the whole strata, we help all of those people with their Medicare issues and concerns.
I love that. So the title of the book is Hiding from the School Bus. And then instead of hiding, you've written the book about it. And so you've come out of hiding. And what was that like for you to be able to say, okay, hey, I'm recognizing, maybe going back to what you were just talking about, I'm recognizing how these hardships and these difficulties have blessed me in their own way. And now I want to share. I don't want to hide anymore. I want to share that so that I can help others recognize the similar things in their own lives.
Well, we started with asking the question, what are you hiding and what are you hiding from? And I've realized that what you hide is what you fear, and what you hide from is what you fear. And it's internal, external. So there were internal things that I feared and external things that I feared. Internally, I feared that I wasn't good enough. And it took me a long time, and I'm still in healing. I'm still in recovery, believe me. But it took me a long time to open up my heart and look inside and say, I am okay the way I am. I'm good the way I am, and I can love myself. And so, for what I was hiding mostly from the world is that I didn't think I was good enough and I didn't love myself. And then what I feared on the outside and what I was hiding from was was approval. I was afraid that I would not receive approval from people. And people pleasing is very dangerous. And you get to the point where you don't know who you are and you become fractured into a million pieces. And I've been there in my life where I have been fractured into a million pieces and have tried to satisfy everyone around me because I want their approval so badly. And I want to fit in or be normal or whatever it is. And so hiding from the school bus for me is kind of a pinnacle at that time in my life, and I hope that there will be more peaks that I continue to reach. But at 50 years old, this was a pinnacle for me to open myself up and to share my true journey with the world and with everyone. And when I did that, some of my close friends, I have one of my closest friends, Wayne. I write about Wayne in the book. He's like my brother. We were roommates in my late 20s, and we still go on family vacation every summer. We take he has kids a similar age to my kids. We're both older dads. I'm 50, but I have an 8-year-old daughter. So we take our kids and we go on vacation every summer together still. So we're close friends. But when he read the book, he said, "Oh my gosh, Calvin, I just didn't I've known you for a long time. I've lived with you for years and years. We've talked about a lot of things, and we both have come from crazy families, and so we can relate on things. I had no idea. I didn't know so much of this." And it's hard. Like, how do you tell someone all of this story? And it's actually not as hard as it sounds. It sounded hard to me, but this was the point in my life where I could be completely open and could share where I came from with the world with a couple of different hopes. My first hope is is that it can be something that my own family and the people close to me will understand, and I've documented my journey and me breaking this cycle, and something they can be very proud of. And then my second hope, of course, is that someone else can be influenced and can say, you know what, you're right. I'm going to take a little risk, and I'm going to let out what's inside of me and not hide it anymore. And I have found in business that this has been beneficial to me. In personal relationships, this has been very, very good for me. So just opening myself up has allowed people to see me as a person and to connect with me and allowed me to also let down walls and barriers. So it's been an incredible experience to share my story with the world.
Thank you. What you were saying there got me thinking about a song lyric. And so I had to look it up because it's something that I've related to. We've talked a little bit offline about how we have similar but very different experiences in our lives. And there's a song that I was thinking about that it just popped into my head while you were talking. And so I'll just read a couple of the lyrics. It says, "Listen to the music. I want you to know that the storm is over. You were feeling clueless, but all it took was finding a four-leaf clover. And now you're home. You're safe right now, and your family is happy. Your family you have now, right? It goes to show that nothing lasts forever. I wish you knew of what was waiting. It's all for you. Don't feel so jaded. You made it to June, and the sun is coming out. Look at you now. You're alive. Look at you now. You're all right." And
Wow. What song
I'll
is
send
that?
it to
That's
you.
amazing.
It's called "Look at You Now" by Gabriella B. It's a pretty kind of unknown independent artist, but yeah, it's something where when I first heard it, I was like, wow, this ties in so much with my childhood.
Can you read that first line again?
Yeah. Listen to the music. I want you to know that the storm is over.
Yeah, right there. Because that's where I've been at the last 3 or 4 years is realizing, he says, listen, storm is over. And the thing that happens inside of us is that there's this great book called The Body Keeps the Score, where it talks about how the body reacts to trauma and it doesn't realize that the storm is over. The more and farther I would go, with every measure of quote unquote success, I became a bishop for the church. I became an entrepreneur, became successful in business, had bought a wonderful place for my family to live, a beautiful home. And, I'm having, and now I have my family and I have the success of a wife who loves me and two children I adore and adore me and look up to me. And we have this wonderful life. But my body thinks we're still in the storm. My mind is racing like we're still in the storm. And it took me a while to wake up from that. And it took some professional help as well to wake up and say, wait a minute, the storm is over, but I'm acting like I'm still in the storm. And that's kind of the place that I have been the last few years is to, I can look at the full journey and say, wow, I'm so far removed and it's incredible how far I've come but at the same time, I keep running and I keep running and I keep running like I'm still being chased or like there's something bad right around the corner, and that's the internal part that you have to struggle with and to find ways to help your body realize that the storm is over.
Yeah, exactly. In the dedication of your book, you say that, and to the boy who hid from the school bus, you were always worth saving. And I love that. What else would you tell that young boy?
I would tell him that he's perfect the way he is and that he's not deficient. So when I wrote that dedication of the book, I cried. I mean, that I felt like those words came to me almost as divine, where God was telling me that hey, you were worth it. Every one of us is worth it. But you know, sometimes we get caught in our own way. There's a book that I love, a secular book, but a spiritual teacher. It's called The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. Eckhart Tolle is kind of a spiritualist, and he takes things from all different religions and sort of formulates them. And I've found a lot of great teachings in his books, and one of them is that we identify ourselves with our mind. And I find this to be very related to what I believe in the gospel of Jesus Christ, which is that our body and our mind is something that God created for us in his image, that we can come and receive this mortal experience and receive a mortal body. But I also believe that we have a spirit and our spirit and our body together make the soul of man. But we begin to believe that our thinking is us and that all of our thinking is us. And Eckhart Tolle says that we are identified with our mind, meaning we think we are our mind, but our mind is a tool for us to use. It's a physical tool, but we have a spirit. And so he talks about observing the mind. He's like, you can't outthink your own thinking because then your mind is still in control. And so you just need to observe. And that has been a great blessing for me to when I begin to feel anxiety. And he separates it as the mind and the mind body, but basically the mind and the body. When I begin to feel anxiety in my body and I feel a shortness of breath or something like that, when I start to feel my mind racing and thinking and overthinking, or when you're talking with someone and you're thinking about what you're going to say instead of listening to what they're saying and all these things, it's like your mind and your body just running, running, running. And it's not like you can outthink it. And so what he says is just observe it, that you aren't the mind and you aren't the body, but you're the observer of the mind and the body. And to me, that's the spirit. And so I allow my spirit or that other presence to observe what I'm feeling, to observe what I'm thinking. And that tends to just calm everything down. And I can return to this moment right here.
I love that. I think that can be really hard to do, actually, for me anyway. But there is such a power in observation of what's going on and trying to take that step back and thinking about things from an eternal perspective is so important. I have one final question, which is always kind of the last question on this podcast. Is that one purpose of Pebbles of Light is to celebrate those relationships that have helped to brighten our path and in turn help us to light the paths of others. And could you share about one or two people who've placed a pebble of light in your path?
Well, I've shared a little bit about Julie. Julie was definitely placed a pebble of light in my path, which is the light of you can learn, you can achieve, you can go to school. Without her, there's no way I could have done it. I would not have been able to get into college, and it would have changed the direction of my life. And so Julie for me was definitely a pebble of light, and I'm so 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 grateful to her. There are many others. There were at the time that I was a flight attendant. There was Tammy and Hector. They for me were pebbles of light to just accept me and love me for who I was. They didn't care whether or not I went to church on Sunday. They didn't care whether or not I was, educated or not educated or anything. They were my friends and they taught me what true friendship is about. And so I love and appreciate them. And then I would be remiss if I didn't say that my wife was more like a giant stone of light,
Yeah, yeah.
a north star of light who has been willing to take on someone as damaged and messed up as I could be. She's from this idyllic family in eastern Idaho, and she was student body president at school. She loves everyone, is kind to everyone. She had a full ride scholarship to college. Like she was perfect, right? And I'm damaged. I'm damaged goods. I kind of messed up, and I'm still figuring things out. It's messy, and she has loved me through every bit of it, and I would not be who I am without her.
Wonderful. So, where can people find out more about you or find the book? All of those things. If people want to learn more, where should they go?
So you can look up the book at hidingfromtheschoolbus.com. It's also available everywhere that books are sold online or what have you. It's on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and Walmart, or wherever you buy books. Most people Amazon. The audiobook is especially incredible. It was read by an incredible voice actor. Believe me, you wouldn't have to listen to my voice for 8 hours. I thought about reading it and I was like, oh no, this is a skill. This is really something. The audiobook on Audible is amazing. The book itself is an Amazon bestseller and has been critically acclaimed. But you know what? It's not for everybody. It works like my mind. My mind sees everything all at once, everywhere, all the time. And so some people have said, wait a minute, this book isn't linear. Well, if you want a linear book, it's not a textbook. I never was good at textbooks. It's not linear, but instead, I think it's very interesting and it's a very artistic piece that kind of flows all at the same time. So you get everything happening all at once, and that's not for everybody, but it has been very well received, and you can find it pretty much anywhere that the books are sold online.
Awesome. Thank you, Calvin, so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Calvin's story shows us that sometimes the very things we once wanted to hide become the most powerful parts of our story. From learning to read as a child who hid from the school bus to building businesses and helping thousands of people, his journey reminds us that growth often happens in unexpected ways. One of the most powerful moments in today's conversation was Calvin's realization that sometimes our bodies keep running like the storm is still happening, even when life has changed. His story is a reminder that healing is not only about moving forward, but also about learning to recognize when the storm has passed. This episode's pebble is to think about one challenge in your life that shaped who you are today. Take a moment to write down how that experience may have strengthened you in ways that you didn't see at the time. Be sure to check the show notes for more information about Calvin, his book, and ways to support Pebbles of Light through Patreon and Buzzsprout. And as always, thank you so much for being part of this community. Thank you for tuning in. My hope is that something helped you feel seen, encouraged, or inspired to bring light to someone else. If a name or moment stood out, don't let it pass. Reach out, express gratitude, or take that next step. You can connect with me anytime on socials at Pebbles of Light or at Maxson.com. If this episode was meaningful for you, please follow the show, rate or review, and share it with someone who might need a lift today. And if you want to go a step farther, you can support the show on Patreon. See you next time.